Hello everyone. A very good morning to one and all present here. Hope you all are doing well. I am Tanya Ahuja, your virtual host for today's session. On behalf of HackBMU's organizing team, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to another pre-hackathon speaker session at HackBMU Edition 4.0. Elevating the level of a hackathon that has a legacy of providing a welcoming and supportive environment to all participants to develop their skills this year by going virtual and utilizing the power of technology and communication, HackBMU 4.0 is hosting a series of workshops and tech talks throughout the month of March and April. These workshops will allow HackBMU's participants to gain in-depth knowledge about new technologies, technical communities, and more. To know more, visit us at www.hackbmu.tech. Without further ado, let's start with today's session. Today, we are going to talk about women and tech. Women have made a lot of contributions in technology, and it is known that 20% of all tech startups across the world were founded by women. Chicago, Boston, and Silicon Valley have the most tech startups founded by women. And to know more about this, let's go international again with our beloved speaker, Mrs. Alana Karen. Mrs. Alana is an award-winning tech leader, author, speaker, and director of search platforms at Google, whose work impacts many of us our everyday lives. Alana has spoken at conferences and summits on technology, leadership, DEI, talent, and innovation. Her book, The Adventure of Women in Tech: How We Got Here and Why We Stay, aggregates hundreds of stories on these topics. So without further ado, let's get started with our session. Mrs. Alana, the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I'm really pleased to be here with all of you today. And I am going to talk for a little while and go through a little bit about my background, why I wrote the book, and my main takeaways from the book. And I'll intersperse some readings from the book within it so you can hear a little bit about the book itself or from the book itself. And then hopefully we'll take some questions. So, just a little bit more about me. I have been in tech for about 20 years, but when I was going to university, I didn't know that's what I would get into. I was studying history and really sort of writing poetry and taking French. It wasn't necessarily a tech path that I even knew. It wasn't at a time 20 years ago where I knew what a career in tech would look like or that I could have one. And just on the side, I got interested in web design and doing some HTML and JavaScript. And I self-taught myself that and used it at internships and also at my first job in tech. And really, that was just kind of like what turned out to be a side passion. Over time, I realized, oh, it could be a path for me. And that was what got me my first job as a webmaster at the university that I went to. And then I joined a startup out in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then when that startup struggled and I got laid off, I joined Google in November 2001. And I've been at Google since then, building out my career. I've had 4 different sort of major job transitions while I've been there, all sort of united by the common theme of operations, how we get stuff done, and leadership, leading big teams of people. And so right now I lead a team of about 70 people who all do program management, helping engineers get things done in the search infrastructure world. And so that's kind of me in a nutshell. And what led me to write the book that you heard about a couple years ago was actually kind of a combination of things happening personally with me and also what I saw happening in the world. What I was feeling was that I was interested in a little bit of a career change, not so much that I felt like I needed to make a huge job change, but I was interested in thinking about what hadn't I got a chance to do that I wanted to do. And one of those things had been writing. So I started to write a series of articles, which I published on LinkedIn, which you can see if you follow me there. And it was really about my career at Google and what I learned from performance management along the way, both the good and the bad, and how I developed over time. And the reaction that I got to that article series, combined with things that I was noticing about the world, led me to write the book. What I was noticing about the world was that when you looked around, you weren't really necessarily seeing stories like in a book or even articles, news articles about women who had different jobs in tech and were making their way through it and learning things. What you saw was either sort of articles or books about women at the tippy top. So they'd already made it to the tippy top and they were CEOs or COOs. And what I heard from women a lot was that that just wasn't relatable. They couldn't tell kind of how that person got there. That person seemed so far out of reach that they didn't relate to them, or they seemed to have privileges that they didn't have. And so it just seemed unfeasible to them. And then there also were stories at that time, and there continue to be, about women having terrible time in tech where they face harassment or other types of behavior. And while I was glad those were coming out, I still kind of felt there was this like everyday women kind of in the middle, like me, making their way through tech, learning things along the way. And where were we? We were sort of missing from the narrative. So I knew a bunch of women like that, and I decided I would interview them. And I interviewed over 80 women for this book and hear their stories and see what they learned along the way. And I also wanted to see whether, one of the things that I saw was that women came from a lot of different backgrounds and they were having a lot of different jobs in technology companies, both technical and non-technical, right? There are the sales roles, finance, HR, et cetera. And so I was really interested in picking that apart and seeing how were those women doing, and do other women know those jobs even exist in technology companies? And then also I was sort of interested in, are women going to leave tech? I was seeing these articles saying, 50 some percent of women leave tech mid-career. And I was curious, is that really true? So I dug in, had a great experience interviewing these women, putting together the book. And the book's been out since late last year. And I thought I would talk about the key takeaways, but to break it up so you're not just kind of listening to me rattle on, I'll intersperse some of the stories from the book. So I'll actually read some quick sections from the book just to break it up, and won't go too long. So we'll have plenty of time for questions, hopefully. So my key kind of takeaways from the book are basically sort of how the book is structured kind of follows my takeaways, which is that the first part really focuses on why we join tech and all the different backgrounds we come from. The second part of the book focuses on the challenges we face. And the third part talks about the skills and support we need to succeed and stay in an often challenging environment. So let me start with the first part, which is why we join tech. And I think this is really interesting. And for the men who are listening, I think probably you'll feel very in common with how the women I interviewed felt. What I thought was really interesting when I asked women what they liked about working in tech, it was almost like we'd rehearsed it. Why they joined tech, why they liked working in tech. Very common story. They liked the opportunity to change the world. They felt like they could scale their impact through technology way better than if they were doing something else. They wanted the opportunity to grow their career too. And technology seemed like a great place, especially since it was growing quickly and there were lots of companies to do that. The third thing was that they tended to like the people. They felt the culture was often quite supportive. Not always, but definitely that was a common theme. And then the third part was that the jobs also tended to fulfill life goals like needing to make a certain amount of money or work in a certain place. And so there was a very good alignment between wanting to help the world and the things that would help themselves. And what's interesting is when we think about my later question about why we stay or why we go, this ends up connecting, just to foreshadow. And I'll talk about that at the end. So I'm going to do a little reading so you get a taste of what women were telling me about when they told me about what they liked about tech. This section is called The Chance to Change the World. Shaping the world has provided a significant motivator for bringing different types of people to tech. A number of women spoke about the power to help the world that they've felt and been able to harness regardless of their role. Sherry Lynn studied economics, what she calls the major for lost children, at Georgetown. All she knew was that she wanted to see the world. Having graduated into the recession around 2010 with limited job opportunities, she felt free to do something completely off the normal path, which is how I ended up moving to Hong Kong and then Burma. She lived in Burma for 2 years, and she saw the country change quickly during that time. So SIM cards used to be $800 a piece. And when I moved there, my office had to front me the cash for it because I didn't have $800. And when I got the SIM card, I had no one to call because none of my friends had $800 to pay for the SIM card. While I was there, the government approved 2 multinational and telecom companies overnight, and the price dropped. It was $800, and then it was $5. And all of a sudden, everyone in the country would find SIM cards for the first time. That quickly brought change to her work environment. She also saw her neighbor watch her first YouTube video, which changed Sherry's aspirations. I was working with farmers at the time in a social enterprise, and it was to help the country. I was like, I've been working very hard trying to have a certain amount of impact, but the impact of this piece of technology dwarfed that. Having had that epiphany, Sherry moved to the Bay Area without a job, getting her first job in tech in a logistics role. Sarah W. thinks about how we can help as the world rapidly changes. I think it's really interesting to think about both the good and the bad of what technology has done over the past 20 or 30 years, in terms of how it's spread information and how that has led to a cultural transformation. How can we influence the cultural transformation and get more good stuff and less bad? The flip side is the reality of the cultural transformation you want, when things are moving in a much faster way, and it's really hard for people to keep track of. As both a writer and a tech employee, she's interested from a job perspective and a storytelling one. The stories we tell about who we are and how we think, like our vocabulary, has shifted a lot faster. Or like the things that the public talks about in public discourse, which seem to shift overnight. If you're not on Twitter the day the black and blue dress thing happens, you miss it, and you will never see it again. The speed and intensity of this change is how people consume information intrigues her. Those problems are really interesting to me, and how you help humans that are not built for this speed of change navigate this world is really fascinating. So that's just a small section from the first part of the book. And as I went on with the book, covering all these different women, all their different backgrounds, all their different ambitions, we then got to the second part of the book. And the second part of the book is a little bit of the reality check, which is, of course, with all of that, there's going to be challenges we face, particularly if we are a minority wherever we're working, whether we're one of the women in the room or one of few. And of course, as one woman puts it in the book, no one said it was going to be easy. So going through the book, I was feeling out some things. You know, who feels like they've had an advantage being a woman? Who feels like it's been a disadvantage? And some of the sub questions that they felt like would come up, like, when do you speak up and how do you speak up? And do you get tired of feeling like you're walking with a sign, as one woman put it? So that particular section digs into some broader issues we face as women as well, whether this pressure to be likable or to support others gets in the way of our careers or causes issues for us. Similarly, this expectation that women will help other women, and why does that work or not work, and what burden does that put on us? And of course, how we can have lives and families with demanding jobs in tech. So again, I'm going to read part of the book, beginning with a part called Walking with a Sign. If Alex could wave a magic wand, she'd change the burden she feels to represent all women. I don't really want to be walking around with a sign that says women in tech or be a unicorn anymore. I don't enjoy the responsibility that any mistake I make represents an entire group of women who aren't meant to code. I don't want every company rejection or hurdle to make me think this isn't what women are supposed to do. And I certainly don't want to consistently have to check if I can count the number of women in the company with just one hand. Alex has felt this weight of representation since college. I would walk out of a class in college when I'd see more than 5 girls because I knew for sure I was in the wrong class. She's had people tell her, "Oh, you just got that job because you're a girl," as if there's a quota that needs to be met, and I'm just here for that. She also misses having more female friends and coworkers. I was a teacher for a short period, and one thing I highly appreciated was the number of female colleagues I had. Nevertheless, tech has some winning points that keep her going. At the same time, however, there are some great things about tech. I don't think the answer is to complain and whine about all men and leave the industry. There's truly some great people who are determined to help women and diversity in tech. I've had excellent mentors, mostly men, who pushed for my growth and encouraged me when I was at my lowest point. The main reason I stayed in tech was my support system, tech community, and friends. When you look past the low moments, it is an incredible place to be, to build something completely new from scratch, to invent, to stand on the shoulders of giants is simply unbeatable. The industry is not perfect, but it is consistently improving. Okay. And so then going into the third part of the book, the third part kind of comes out of all of those challenges and says, okay, well, what were some of the skills that the women built? What were some of the tools that they amassed over time to deal with those challenges? And what kind of support did they need? And I was honestly most nervous writing this section in the book because there's so much advice out there, and there's a ton of books in the career advice space, ton of articles you can read, all sort of stuff. But in the end, I saw repeated patterns in what helped the women I interviewed, what helped them the most, both in terms of frequency, but also the level of impact it had. And I took from that to put together my list of 5 tools, the 5 tools that helped them. And I will note again, this list of tools is very cross gender. We just might feel like as women, we need to pay more attention or use them more depending on the environment we're in. So the 5 tools are, in brief, resilience, building the grit and the power to withstand adversity. This is the muscle we can build for ourselves that helps us get up again after we fall down or recover when there have been issues. Marketing 101. How do we speak up and promote our talents and accomplishments, particularly when maybe we've been trained not to over time, or we've seen drawbacks to doing so? Ask, having the confidence to network, to reach out and ask for help or ask for what we want, whether it's a new job opportunity, a promotion, a raise, or even just help on a project. Finding support, seeking out those who will help us navigate our careers and provide a sense of belonging. And then finally, the fifth one, own your awesome, knowing that you are enough, that you are worthy, and carrying that inside you, even when you move to a new role or a new company or a new environment. A theme throughout many of these sections, I will say, is about our well being and how we take care of ourselves and prioritizing our physical and mental health. Because obviously, there's a huge component in these jobs, fast paced environments in tech of being able to sustain ourselves. And I think you'll feel a hint of that in the next reading I'll do called You Are Worthy. Maybe you still don't believe in your awesomeness in your career. And I get that. Maybe start first at home. Beyond being worthy of career opportunity and a voice in the room, I also want women to feel that they deserve boundaries, rest, and a healthy home life. The need to sacrifice ourselves at all costs is not sustainable. Georgia is thinking about how to set up her life for a family and work right now as she have her first child. I think I have to know what kind of space that I want. What would make me happy? Ask for that. She's referring to the kinds of boundaries or jobs she'd want to have, with fewer on call requirements and 24/7 emergencies. Once she's done the work to figure out what she wants and ask for it, then she needs to stick to it. If I do get granted those things, I need to hold the people accountable to actually let me do them. She knows that she's historically chosen to work after hours, something that her husband calls her on. That is a choice that I am making to respond, and that feeds this cycle and incentivizes people to continue to keep doing that. She now views it as her responsibility to end that cycle. Annie spoke of a similar idea. Where are we our own worst enemy in finding balance? I think that tech is something where you have to put your own boundaries in, and it's very easy to say yes. I think also, as a woman in tech, it's very easy to say, yes, I will do this. I will take care of that. I will clean that up. She admits that saying no and setting boundaries is hard, especially when there's a major initiative like going public or a product launch. No one will tell you to stop but yourself, and tech will not take you to take a tell and tech will not tell you to take a break. There's unlimited vacation, which means never. In addition, she feels like there is more to prove as a non-technical woman. I do feel like as a woman in tech, it can be harder because there are fewer of you, and sometimes you feel that you might have more to prove. I think also, coming from a non-technical background, I feel like I have to prove myself in other ways. Ultimately, she took time off after feeling burned out at a previous company. It was very good to reevaluate. What are the things I value? What are the things that I want to build? And come back really energized. Now she thinks through both when she turns on the computer and how she feels. You have to just shut the laptop off and also understand what I did is good enough. I have this expertise, I have this experience, I have this knowledge, and that's good enough for today. Finally, just to wrap this up, I was interested in seeing why we stay and why we go. There's this stat that goes around in tech. It's about 56% of women leave tech mid-career. I dig into it in the book. It's specific to set science, engineering, technical backgrounds, and it was studied a while ago, back in 2008 originally. But I was really interested. If I'm talking to 80 plus women, will I find that 50% of them are about to leave? And I spent time talking to them and seeing, did they ever think about leaving tech and why? And I also sought out women who had left to understand their stories. I will say news articles always make this sound kind of mysterious, like why are women leaving tech? Or extremely specific. Some of them will say, like, it's motherhood, it's bad cultures. But I found a straightforward answer, although it is somewhat more nuanced than what those articles made it sound like, which is essentially that what brings us here is ultimately the same stuff that can make us go. If we came here to change the world and we no longer feel like we can, if we're stuck with a lot of management red tape, if we just don't seem to be able to make a difference, if the culture we're part of doesn't feel good to us, it isn't something that we feel part of or that we belong, maybe we're stuck salary wise, or maybe sometimes we've just decided to change the world in a totally different way. I talked to women who had decided to be therapists or go into running a childcare center. And so just a very different application. So in the end, I felt comforted that it wasn't a ton of women thinking about leaving, but I also thought that it meant there was a much more everyday challenge for all of us to figure out how we can continue to help women and everyone else feel engaged and like they matter and like they belong. So I end the book with a summary of a question that I asked all the women, which is if you could change one thing about working in tech, magic wand style, what would it be? And so I invite you all to think about what yours would be. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or visit my website at alanakaren.com. I'd love to hear from you and hear what you'd love to change about tech or what you love about it. And that's the end of my prepared talk. I don't know whether we want to accept questions from anyone watching, or if you have questions, Tanya.
Now, I would request all the participants that if they have any questions, then they can ask Ms. Alana by putting them in the chat box.
See whether anybody has any.
Participants can put their questions in the chat box. I would request the participants, if they have any questions, then they can put in the chat box. We have one question here. What would be the biggest challenge for the next generation of women, and how can we be a strong role model for them?
So I think one of the things that I'm seeing is, and it's sort of an interesting challenge. When I was graduating from university and starting working, there really wasn't any of this talk about unconscious bias, microaggressions. There was no cancel culture. There was no social media. There were like none of these things. And on the con side of that, that meant that I went for years not knowing that some of these dynamics were at play. You know, I would blame myself after meetings. I would think I just needed to try harder to be heard. And it it definitely made me resilient in many respects, but it also meant that I was kind of bearing this weight and surviving without knowing. Now, I think because we've started to talk more about these things and understand a little bit more about how society has been sort of coded over the years, and what are the expectations of men and what are the expectations of women, and how is that playing out in the workplace. I think that it has the pro of making us feel less alone in this, not having it be just us thinking it's our issue. Um, there is a con, though, which is that I think that sometimes then you can have a greater risk of wandering around and just saying, well, it's their fault. No one's listening to me. They're promoting that guy instead of me. It's their fault. And I think that we are going to have to find some balance, right? I think it is a it's hard to say because I think that like we're not necessarily there yet where I'm really worried we're like going so far over that we're losing skills that we should build. But I could see the danger of just sort of making everybody else the bad guy and not necessarily figuring out, oh, well, how can I navigate this? How can I try? And then if it still doesn't work, okay, fine. Then I've done everything I can. I've tried everything I can. It is truly them. It's not me. And then you can, yeah. So there's a little bit, long story short, I think that we're all going to have to be role models for showing how we navigate this. Because otherwise, I could just see it ending up in a lot of finger pointing and not any better level of understanding, not like a new better, just a lot of finger pointing, which I actually think we're seeing a little bit of nowadays, but more if you follow US politics, more in US politics. But I think that there's a danger to that. And so a polarization that can happen where everyone just says, oh, okay, well, that's men, that's women, instead of figuring out how to navigate it. And I do think we're going to have to be a strong role model for women saying, well, yeah, maybe that was mansplaining, but did it help you to yell at them? What's actually going to help if you're mansplained too? Like, what's the next step now that you can identify it? So, just kind of an interesting, it's like not any easier, I would say. It's just different. And I think that that's going to be um, part of trying to help this new generation of women, even if they can name the thing, what are they going to do about it? I think that's going to be a challenge.
We have one more question here. Do you think enough is done to help women to get into the tech industry or more needs to be done?
I feel like, by the way, this is so nice. I've never seen this before, and it's so pretty. It's like so professional how the questions show up. Um, no, probably not yet. But what I would say is that it's a bit of a long road to figure out how do you dismantle or change the systems that were built that essentially made the pipeline what they are today. Um, because a lot of this comes from years and years of societal expectations of what are the gendered roles of women versus men in society, and what then is the worthwhile relative investment in your women, just to be blunt. And so you'll see this vary from country to country, but every country is essentially on some version of a path of women were the traditional caretakers in the home. And then they moved on to having traditional caretaker jobs in society. And it's only in recent decades that they're potentially sharing or splitting the roles that are more thought of as leadership or not traditional service, right? Like not teacher, not nurse, right? Like they're expanding beyond that. And so everywhere is kind of on this path. And you'll see the schooling kind of matched it, right? Where are the weed in, weed out mechanisms along the way, and who is encouraged to have what roles along the way. And still, what is the expectation of women leaving the workforce after maybe after they get married, but certainly once they have children. So if you look at every little bit of that, every little bit of where's a weed in, where's a weed out, where is a decision made for us early on that takes us down a different path, or where are we encouraged or not encouraged or whatnot, there's something to do there and probably not enough being done yet. So lots of opportunity. And I think it's going to take lots of different things. It's a system, which means there's no one culprit. There's lots of little things you have to do to influence the system and move it somewhere else.
Somebody's asking, how's life at Google?
I mean, life at Google, it's interesting right now, obviously, because we're not at work. I mean, we're working hard. Many of us have been working extremely hard to keep up with the information demands during a global pandemic. And we had a major US election, and there's other major elections around the US, and Olympics are coming up. So, there's always a high demand. It's a fast-paced place. At the same time, it's a big company, which means that there's more and more demands that it takes just to be a Googler, like just to go to the meetings and do the trainings and do the this and do the that. And so there's a real balance there. It's generally been, I've felt very privileged. I think a lot of us have, to work there, to have the stability during a global pandemic of a successful company, to be and to feel connected to the information that people need, to know that we work at a place that was providing crucial information like COVID vaccination information to people, I think was, really important to so many of us and so core to why we worked at Google to begin with. But it's always busy. And that section that I read about, like, you're the one who has to decide when you shut the computer is very, very true there. Endless work. There's always something to do. And you have to determine your boundaries for sure. And I don't know when we'll be back in the office. So that's that's still uncertainty there.
Do we have any other questions left? You can ask them in the chat box. So I guess there are none. So, well, ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up our session. On behalf of HackBMU's 4.0 organizing team, I thank Mrs. Alana Karen for making time in their busy schedule to join us here. We would also like to express our gratitude towards all our sponsors who are making all this possible. HackBMU 4.0 is brought to you by our platinum sponsors, DevFolio and Coding Ninjas, our gold sponsors, Matic, Fortis, and Tezos, our workshop and coding partners, CodeChef and Unacademy. Our partners, JetBrains, Sketch, Rosenfeld, Balsamic, No Starch Press, Tascade, Shashido, EcoAR, OnePassword, Axure, Egghead.io, The Codex, Code Asylums, Testmail, Verilog.in, Give My Certificate, and Enmovido. Our digital learning partner, Broad Infinity, and our media partners, Cryptopolitan and ED Times. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here. Don't forget to fill the feedback form for the session to receive your certificate. The link for the same is in the chat box. Once again, we thank you, Mrs. Alana Karen, for joining us today.
Thank you.